Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and for those of you who are listening when this episode comes out, happy week of Thanksgiving. This week I have an interview that I did with someone that I met recently. And we got to talking, and he shared with me some of his experience of leaving his PhD before finishing, which I thought was a really good message for some of our listeners to hear. So I hope you enjoy. Here is my interview with Garrett Wenger. All right, so we're going to jump in here. I'm here with Garrett, and Garrett and I met not too long ago, but we got to talking about the PhD life and experience. And Garrett, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's start. Let's go back and start from the beginning. So, where did you go for undergrad, and what was your undergrad major?
I went to University of Maryland, College Park. I started there 2009, graduated 2013, and my major was in electrical engineering.
And at that point, did you have any experience like doing research or anything like that?
Yeah, so I like my first internship was, I guess, summer after freshman year, and I did it at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. So I think I interned there for 2 years. Naval Research Laboratory isn't like full research institution. I was just I was also just an intern. So like I wasn't doing research there, but I was at least kind of adjacent to some topics. And then definitely I shifted. I didn't continue the internship in the future in junior and senior year because I did like it's like a summer research program at University of Maryland. I forget what it was called. It was called like the REU, the Research Experience for
Yep,
Undergraduates. Yeah.
that's it.
And
Yep.
so I did that the summer after junior year. Um, and I also then continued on I worked with a professor like a little bit before that in sophomore year and a little bit in junior year, just kind of on and off. I was when I was working with Dr. Blankenship at Maryland. And then for my research experience, I was working with Dr. Krishna Prasad. I honestly can't remember if I started working with him before that or if I just continued on after. But either way, I worked with him for like the entirety of my senior year. So I did like research things for most of 2 years, I would say, in the undergrad program.
Did that sort of like, did you catch the research bug, as it will, or would you just say it was sort of something that you fell into and therefore, you experienced it that way?
I think I really enjoyed. I really liked the academic environment as a whole, and so I think that I was interested in kind of more of what that meant, I guess, and a lot of the times that does mean research. And I liked trying to, I don't necessarily think I'm like the most like creative person, but I think I'm really good at like applying a tool set. Like I think that is something that I can, and that has pros and cons for research because you certainly need creativity, but you also certainly need to be able to apply tools well. And so I think I liked how the research kind of tried to force me to maybe be somewhat more creative in things, but it also really allowed me to like test out what I had been attempting to learn at least in school. Like so I think it
Hmm.
was yeah, I think I was interested in making a career out of that, I would say, just because no, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I like fell into it. I think it just became I intentionally took on more of it as I
Hmm.
found the opportunities to.
And so, well, so did that, so I guess did you go right into your PhD after undergrad?
I did, yeah. So
Okay.
I didn't go to industry or anything. I went straight to the PhD program from undergrad. So I started in, I guess that would be fall, so August of 2013. Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, were you thinking, I need to get a PhD because of what I want to do? Like, I want to be in research long term, or just, I like this, I want to do it more, let's keep doing this? Or a third option that I just
Yeah, I think
assumed.
that so maybe end of junior year, start of senior was when I was definitely interested in academia, but I wasn't totally sure what I was looking to do after college. I mean, electrical engineering, yes, I loved my major, what I was actually like learning in school. That stuff was great. And at the time, I was doing my focus in engineering was in controls and signal processing. And so that's how I ended up in like the robotics realm. Because I did robotics related things in undergrad as well. And I think I was working as a TA as well. So I was a TA for I think starting in sophomore year, or maybe it was either like 4 or 5 semesters that I was a TA for engineering courses. And I remember one meeting with my like academic advisor where he was talking to me, looking over like what I was. This is before of applications to grad programs. So this must have been like I guess second semester of junior year, and he was going over what I was doing and that I was in the research program stuff and that I was doing all the teaching experience type things. And he said something along the lines of like, "Oh yes, it looks like you're on track to go into academia." And that was when I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that is that makes sense. Yeah."
You make a point. Yeah.
Yeah,
You make,
sure. I'm doing the things that are my understanding of the next thing. So yeah, I could see how that would be a reasonable trajectory there. So I think that was when I first started to like seriously consider going to grad school. And I would say like realistically, what I really wanted to do was to work in like advanced prosthetics. And I figured for that I probably needed to be in a like a some kind of high up research lab because they're
mhm.
sophisticated devices both mechanically and if you're going to be interfacing with the body, that's a whole nother discipline going on there. There's a lot of power electronics and signal processing and all that stuff. It's just like such a sophisticated system that I figured it probably was reasonable to try to go on a continuing education in order to get into fields like that. That's the way I figured that was kind of a necessity. So yeah, I was doing it because of that goal,
Mhm.
but also it was definitely also the path of like least resistance in some ways. I was
Yeah.
good at school, and it's you can say, hey, like if I'm good at school, I trained myself to be really good at school. I
Yeah.
could do more school.
Yeah.
Here's a way to do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not surprised looking back on it, but as I interview more and more people, a lot of people have this like they have multiple reasons, but one reason too is like I like and I'm good at school, so I'm gonna do more of it. It's just like it's that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so you mentioned robotics. So can you tell me more about sort of what got you interested in that in undergrad? What kind of cutting edge research you were doing?
Oh, so I mean that was definitely like the actual robotics interest was definitely from like Star Wars and stuff.
Oh, nice.
And not I don't mean like the droids because the droids are a whole weird, but I'm talking about like Luke Skywalker's arm. I remember like because that was a
Oh,
robotic prosthesis. So
there you
like the
go.
whole and because my mom is also a physical therapist, and so I grew up around people who had like she didn't do so much with amputees. She primarily dealt with like stroke victims or head injuries, that kind of stuff. So they had all of their limbs that they still needed rehabilitation. But I also was familiar with the type of rehab that people who did have amputations needed. And so I was grew up seeing that kind of stuff because I went to the hospital with her a lot as a kid, 'cause that's where my daycare was. And so, I saw rehab and I saw amputees and then I saw like, in Star Wars I saw robotic prostheses and that's definitely where I always thought that was, some of the coolest stuff that also had like a really good chance of improving quality of life. Because there's a lot of cool things in engineering that are just like, little nice to haves. Like I love my smartphone, I love my phone.
Yeah,
I'm on it all the time. Yeah, great. I'm not saying it's like I wouldn't want to make that. Well, no, I personally wouldn't want to make that.
yeah,
But I think they're great devices. I think it's great that people make them, and that's all fantastic. It's just not what I was like into electrical engineering for. And so, yeah, I wasn't doing like prosthetics related stuff in my undergrad experiences at Maryland. I was just on in like a it was a pretty mathy and like algorithmic path planning research focused lab. So I was doing those kinds of things and like control laws because, like I said, I was focused, like my classes were kind of focused on control theory there. But those were also the ones that were like most adjacent to robotics in the program that I was in, or at least that's how it felt. And so I think that was, yeah, I think I kind of probably fell into the control portion because I wanted to do robotics things, and the closest I could get to robotics, in
Yeah.
general, was more of the control stuff.
Yeah. Cool. So I love that Star Wars was your sort of um origin story, if you will. So okay, so you finish undergrad and you're gonna do more school. What next? What happens next?
Yeah, so that's when I applied to a variety of programs. I applied to University of Michigan, Berkeley, and University of Pennsylvania. I think those were the three that I got into the robotics programs. And I also I and this is where it starts to you can start to tell that maybe not maybe bad decisions, but where you're thinking to yourself like, okay, well that wasn't going to work out. Is that I'm very much like long term interested in staying in and around Maryland, and
Mm,
so I was never one to think like, oh yeah, I'll just go to get a professorship job like anywhere, which
right.
obviously a lot of times you kind of have to do if you're going to stay in academia because you have to go where the jobs are. They're limited. And I either maybe didn't super understand that or like didn't want to acknowledge that. Who knows what it
Mm,
was. But yeah, so I was like, I would have applied to, continue on at University of Maryland. The professor that I was working with, Christian Prasad, told me something along the lines of like, in order to, build your background, you need to like get like a diverse or more diverse background there. That makes sense. A very reasonable thing for him to say. And he kind of jokingly said like he wouldn't accept me into the program there. Maybe that was
just because of
serious.
that.
Yeah, just to be like, I'm not going to accept you into Maryland because I know you're going to come here if I do, and so that way. So I realistically, yeah, he probably would have. Actually, I think I did get into Maryland because I remember they kept sending me emails because I had forgotten to say that I wasn't going there, and then I was getting emails like until the start of the semester. Anyway, point is, I that was what kind of like pushed me away from Maryland as a school. Was that he was emphasizing how it's important for academia to kind of build somewhat of the academic network, but also just the diversity there in terms of schooling.
Yeah.
Um, and but at the same time, I part of the reason I ended up at Penn probably has to do with its proximity to Maryland. It was like kind of, I liked the school, but also it was closer. So it
Driving
was within
distance. Yeah.
yeah, it was within the realm of where I wanted to end up. So that was fine.
Yeah. No, I mean that happens. I interviewed someone who did her undergrad, straight through at the same school, and same thing. I mean, she was advised not to. There are reasons that she did, and there are pros and cons to it. I think you sort of know how the system works, but it's also beneficial to kind of see other things, see how other academic programs work, especially if you may end up in an academia position down the line. So who knows if that was good advice? Who knows if the decisions were right?
Yeah.
Um, so you ended up at Penn. Was that in electrical engineering?
Yeah, I think the program was technically electrical engineering, but it was a lab that was both like it was full of electrical and mechanical engineers. It might have been called robotics. I just know that's what I ended up with a
Hmm.
degree in robotics. And so it was I think technically it would have been a PhD in electrical engineering.
Okay. And what was the focus of the lab? Were you really in the prosthetics world?
So it was a lab that focused on legged robotics.
Hmm.
Which is part of why I was like, that was, a part of why I ended up there was like, okay, I do want to do things that could maybe they're not going to be directly translatable to prosthetics right now, but it's at least in the same realm, and I could kind of transfer that over via a postdoc or whatever it may be down the line. Um, so I worked in Daniel Kodachek's lab. He, if you ever like, there's it, I don't know if it's well known. I think they're relatively well known because of like the relation to Boston Dynamics. I forget exactly what the relation to Boston Dynamics is for the lab, but I think like some of those people came out of our lab or were postdocs at our lab.
Oh.
I think Al Rizzi in particular. Don't quote me on that. Well, I guess this is a whole quoting thing and that it's an interview. But I think
I won't quote you, but I will post this.
um, so there was some relation to Boston Dynamics, and I had like known of Boston Dynamics for a very long time from watching other YouTube videos as throughout high school and all that stuff, thinking they were super cool, and they had pretty sophisticated robots and devices there, and all that stuff was super awesome. And so the robot that at the time was kind of the main platform in Kodachek's lab was X-Rex, which was a like a hexapedal robot, has these like little C-shaped they look like the fixed prostheses that like runners use. I think they're called the blades. They look kind of like that.
Oh
Uh
yeah, okay.
but so it was a legged robotics lab, but it was a lab that like it was focused more on like the control theory and like navigating over different terrains with very simple actuators. So it wasn't, I don't know, maybe it wasn't
So,
super translatable some of the prosthetic stuff, but it was at least in the same kind of realm there.
yeah, and it sounds like it was almost like performance of the prosthetics, right? Like in different environments, or am
It
I
was
misunderstanding?
they didn't focus too much on like the limbs themselves, I guess, but it was more so like the gaits of the
Oh, I
robot
see.
itself. So like different behaviors of, I mean, the main one of just being like alternating tripod, 6 legs. So like 1, 2, 3, and like two sets of like, well, alternate tripods
Yeah.
for stability. And then there were all these like different like leaping gaits or pronking gaits, things that were, it was more like the animalistic. And we worked with
Mm-hmm.
other labs that like studied animals in particular, and then we would try to like look at the efficiency of those behaviors. Some people in the lab use it just as like a platform to get sensors into um, more locations than like a wheeled robot could. So it was kind of
Oh,
there were kind of two focuses, I guess, somewhere on like the actual mechanisms and aspects of the robot itself in that regard, and some were like, I have this thing that I want to do or this thing that I want to measure, and I need to like automate its measurement in a certain way, and so they use the robot as like a walking laboratory, that kind of thing.
cool. Very cool. I'm gonna go after this. I'm gonna go look that up because that sounds cool. Um, so tell me now what. Tell me now. No, tell me. At what point? So you're in your program at Penn, and at what point did you decide that you didn't want to keep going? Didn't want to keep doing it?
I would say that was let's see, it was like April or May of 2016. Yeah, I think
So
that's right. Because I
year two,
left. No, that was year three. Because
year
I
three.
started fall 2013.
Mm,
So yeah, so that I had done 3 full years in the program. I had like passed my quals. I had started to uh, uh, go to like write papers and go to conferences. It was like I'd written 1 or 2 papers at that point. I guess it was two. Yeah, I'd written 2 papers at that point, and I had presented one at a conference. I had, written like a workshop proposal and done the workshop, and then my second paper I had written and was accepted, but or was in the process of going through review for a conference, but I had not yet like actually presented it because that was in the fall of that year of 2016. Um, but yeah, so I was 3 years into the program, and for some labs that would be like well past the halfway point. This
mm,
lab in particular, it was definitely not, and so that was kind of where what made me like like consider and like, okay, if I go 1 semester, 2 semesters longer, then I'm actually at the halfway point, and then I think if I'm
yeah.
at the halfway point, because I do have friends in the lab still who are at 7, 8 years. It's a long lab because well,
Yeah.
various reasons, but I mean, one of them is, in theory, the reason is because we do both, well, theory and then practice. So we do things provably, mathematically, and then do them on a robot. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's the total reason that it is so long, but that is kind of how it was sold to me. And so yeah, so I knew that it was going to be like a long-term thing, and at that point I was not yet halfway in. And so if I was going to leave, then that would be
Yeah.
kind of a reasonable time to do it, because I knew if I didn't do it then, I wouldn't do it at all.
Yep. And at that point, had you sort of quote earned a master's, or did you have to sort of do a few things to kind of leave with one? Do you remember?
Uh, so I ended up staying an extra semester. I don't remember. I'd also finished all my classes. I'd taken 10 classes. In addition to finishing my quals, I had done all like the course requirement stuff. So I was like just in the research phase at that point. Um, and I don't know if the courses that I had taken directly covered the requirements for a master's. I certainly wasn't taking courses to try to like get the master's along the way. Like I wasn't
Right.
planning. I didn't go in with the intent of leaving.
Right.
It just it happened. And so I didn't go in, and I didn't like structure my program so that if I needed to get out, I could just go at the drop of a hat. That wasn't how it happened. It just was. I had 10 courses. A master's was 10 courses. Um, and so I actually ended up staying an extra semester. And that was, so I ended up getting like two master's degrees. Part of my reasoning there, my reasoning was, on average, people get a master's in 2 years. So if
Yeah.
I'm here, 3.5, 4 years, I could probably get two masters out of that. So I stayed an extra semester. I took, I don't know, four classes. I think I used some of my previous research work as like independent study, or like a thesis. I forget exactly how I did that, but I used like a through the double counting a class or two with the way they could do like a, this is one of their ways of doing, like it's like a dual major in undergrad. It was just a dual master's kind of thing. So I double counted a class or two for the electrical engineering and then the robotics master's programs at Penn.
Cool.
So yeah, I stayed an extra semester, and I don't remember if that was necessary to get a single master's. Like I maybe could have left right then. But
Hmm.
there were also some courses that I was interested in taking that I
Yeah.
figured I'll
While you're
stay
in it, you
on
might
and
as
do
well
them.
take it because
Yeah.
we all know we're not going to go back to school later, right?
Well, I actually did, but
Oh, we'll
I'm
get
in
there.
classes right now, but
Are you?
yeah.
Okay, we'll get there. So at that point when you were, sort of maybe disheartened by how much longer it was going to take, did you was there ever a thought to like change groups or change projects, or at that point were you like I'm too far along in this direction anyway, so starting over would feel like too much?
I think I the time commitment wasn't necessarily the thing that disheartened me in particular. It was just the thing that was like the driving force for forcing my hand to make a decision at a certain point.
Ah, I
Yeah,
see.
the
Okay.
thing that actually was one of the reasons that or I guess, I mean, it's probably a factor in why I left, but other parts of it were like I had become somewhat disillusioned with staying in academia. I was
Yep.
I think that if you're going to stay in academia, you should also focus on being an educator,
Yeah.
because you are also there, unless you're at a pure research institution, which I guess is not academia. Unless you're at a pure research institution, one of your responsibilities is to teach people, and so you should make that part of your interests. Or if it's not part of your interests, you should not do that thing.
Yeah.
And it was one of my interests. Like I said, I was a TA for at least 2 years in undergrad. When I had the opportunity, it was one of the requirements in
Mhm.
grad school, and then I did it on top of the like, I think it was probably only one semester that was required, and I did it extra because I was like, yeah, I'm going to try to, build up this skill.
Mhm.
And I would say that I was maybe looked down upon for doing that. It
Mm.
definitely felt that way. I definitely got some like, oh, why are you doing that? You should be spending all your time on research. And I argued, well, because if I'm going to go into academia, I need to focus on also being an educator, and the people who were asking me these questions were like, "That's not important." And that disgusted me.
Yep.
I thought that was an
Yeah.
awful thing to say because we've all had bad professors, and we all thought, this is also because I had some not great professors at Maryland that were in a thing that I really ended up loving.
Yeah.
Like all the work that I do now are courses that I really disliked in undergrad.
Mm.
And
Which
you
was
know,
because of the professor, not because of the topic.
right, because if I like the stuff now, it was just taught in a way that was, I don't know, it was not, it was a way that didn't mesh with me. Maybe other people thought the professor was great, and that's fine. It just really did not work for me personally. I also know it didn't work for anyone else in the class, so I think it was the professor and not the material, but whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
but I really like the stuff that I do now, and I would have done more of that in undergrad if I didn't have that kind of experience. I think that made me think, oh, that stuff seems terrible, and I never want to do that. I ended up having to do it because I was doing like hands-on design work in grad school since we built all of our robots. And that's when I was like, oh, this hardware stuff, the circuit design and all that stuff, I love that. That's what I do all the time now, and it is super, super fun. It's the part of electrical engineering that I love the most. I love it way more than controls, which is, I mean, it's interesting, but that's what I focused on because that's where I had the most interesting professors. And so just the concept of not focusing on the educational or the part where you're educating others, that part was pretty upsetting to me. And so that was one of the things that turned me off of academia. Also the
Yeah.
like once you get really good at research, then in a lot of ways you become more of like a manager of research, and I wanted like to do the research.
Hmm.
Um, so there was
Yeah.
that. There was also my lab at the time was spinning up a startup, and that startup is now Ghost Robotics. One of like that's in the news. They got some bad
Oh
press recently
yeah.
for putting a giant sniper rifle on a robot, as they should. Bad press. And
Great.
don't worry, I've told them that to their faces, so it's not like I'm just throwing shade on a podcast. I said that's bad. Uh,
It's okay. Not that many people listen to this
well,
anyway,
either way,
so.
I'm just letting them know I'm not doing this because I think you can't hear me. Uh, but yeah, so there was also some I don't know, not bad blood. It was just like there were some weird ways that
Questionable.
work was going to shake out, and like the grad students weren't allowed to be part of the startup besides the founders. This is what I was directly told, at least, was that no other people were going to be part of the startup. That was according to the advisor. But also we were going to essentially have to use their platforms. And it's like, well, that means we're going to be doing free labor for them. We're already
Yep.
kind of doing free labor for grad school in a lot of ways. There was a whole lot of different reasons that I was kind of turned off from the whole thing. They all came to a head in, yeah, that April-May timeframe of 2016.
What an emotional nightmare that sounds like. Honestly, but what I take away from this though is I'm really impressed with your the self-awareness you had in to look at what you were doing in grad school and say, here's what brings me the most joy. It's doing this, and then say, oh, let me pursue that. Who says I have to keep doing all of this stuff when I really have found something that I enjoy? And that's great, and I'm happy that you did that.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, there was also one other major factor
Okay.
that was like driving me to not just leave but go to a particular place. Is that at I went to the DARPA robotics competition just as like a representative for Penn. Like again, I did education things, I did outreach things. Like I went there just to
Mm.
like represent Penn as a grad school program at the robotics competition. I just happened to be like our booth was adjacent to the booth for Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. So another of those like it's not this was more of a research institution than NRL was, I guess, but it was still like not a total institute. It was kind of both. It was somewhat defense industry, but also somewhat research institution. Whatever. Point is, while I was just walking around at the expo there, I talked to some of their engineers, and like the one main thing that I remember them having on display was their like super advanced prosthetic limb.
Oh,
It
Star
was
Wars, here
yeah,
we
right. So
come.
like I think I'd been vaguely aware that it existed, but then like I saw it in action. Like I saw this really cool advanced prosthetic that had like articulated fingers, and it was all the smarts were in the hand, and then but it also had, you know, a wrist, and up to, it was modular, so it could do up to like the shoulder and all that stuff. And I've, you know, if you look up, I forget what it's called. It's called the MPL, the modular prosthetic limb. So
Oh,
that's what
very
they that's
cool.
what it is. There are videos of like a guy, I think, playing piano with it. I mean, it's not great piano because it's still kind of slow or whatever, but the fact is he has no arms and he's playing piano. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And so that APL was like in Maryland, and they had prosthetics, and it was robotics, and it was hardware engineering. And that was at a time where I was not super into staying in academia. And I also knew from the engineers I talked to that they didn't have PhDs and they were doing research. And
Great.
so, yeah, when I was like weighing all the things and what to do next, I was like, well, do I need the PhD to do what I want to do right now? And I came to the conclusion that no, I didn't. Maybe if I wanted to be a research director at something in the future, then yes, I would, and maybe that would be an issue. But also there are ways to get a PhD later on in your career if you really need
Yeah.
to, and that at that point you've had lots of other, you know, experience that you have taken in, and you know really know your interest well, and you are somewhat of a maybe a technical expert in the field already. So I figured if I was going to get a PhD, it would be for continuing my career, not for starting it.
That's great. I love that. So I was going to ask you about the job search once you decided to leave, but it sounds like you didn't do one really, or you just focused on APL, or did they offer you a job right there?
Yeah, so that the robotics competition must it was probably, I guess, summer of 2015. So that was before I was considering leaving. So like I didn't like
Oh,
try
okay.
to intern with them or anything at the point. Um but yeah, so I applied to them in uh Jan I guess when I was leaving grad school, so May, or because I stayed 2 semesters, one where I was just like working in my old lab to like redesign some of the robotics components that I was the only one who really knew, because there were other people who were,
Mm,
I don't know, I was trying to make them more streamlined because, as often happens, you do your project, and
yeah.
then if the thing breaks, it's broken until you do your next project.
Yeah.
Because that's just the ebb and flow of work. But also, if you have lab mates, it's maybe broken for them and they have to fix it. So I was trying to make it so that when I left, the robots would be more reliable. That's what I was hoping for.
That's very honorable
I
of
don't
you.
know how well it worked, but I tried. But yeah, so I ended up staying for that extra semester to do courses, and then a final semester as just like a, I don't know what my title
Re-
was, but I was like a,
research guy,
yeah, I was like in the lab or
lab
whatever.
guy.
And yeah, I applied to APL and must have been like March or April of 2017, and then I started working there. I did apply to other places, but only one, and it was Northrop Grumman. I didn't really want to work there. I just didn't wanted to be honestly tell my mom that I applied to more than one job.
Yeah, that's
So it
fair.
was an
That's a great
honest
reason.
lie.
Yeah, that's good. And then so you got offered the job and there you go.
Yeah, basically. I mean,
What?
it's a big place, and so it was kind of a safe bet of like I could, you interview with like a lot of the groups inside, and then I think I interviewed with 3 groups, and I like ranked them, and I got matched up with one based on who wanted me, who didn't, that kind of thing.
And how long were you there then after that?
I worked there until uh pandemic. I worked there a little into the pandemic, so it was June of 2020.
20. Yeah, that sounds
No,
right.
wait. What year is it? It's 2020. It's June of 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not like start of the pandemic, but like
Yeah, I guess it was longer in. Yeah, it was longer in. Okay.
through the pandemic a little bit. Um, okay, so June 2021, and then you made a switch to where you are now?
No. So okay,
Oh, okay.
so I actually ended up at APL. I worked on the modular prosthetic limb for like a couple months. A project that was there. It was really cool. I got to like I literally did the thing that I was hoping to do at APL in this like enormous place. It was only a project I did for a little while, but I did get to do it. That was a lot of fun. And that's where I realized that, oh, the struggle with this stuff is that it's really expensive and it's not really a priority, unfortunately,
Huh.
because I mean, it wasn't
Of who?
of the people who
Of
had the money. So I guess the
okay.
government. Uh,
Yeah.
it wasn't not a priority. It was just like we have other things that aren't smart prosthetics, and there are ways to rehab like wounded soldiers and that kind of thing. And I'm sure there were drawbacks to the MPL that were for that made it not like a huge funding focus, but it was kind of always like on fumes at the point where I entered the lab, and so we were doing like small things here and there to try to like get more funding down the road, which isn't a bad thing. It was just like I was interested in doing much more
Then you had resources.
that and like and like and then when I wasn't doing those projects, I didn't want to do things for the Border Patrol, which is what my group did
Fair.
frequently. And so I was much more interested in doing things that were like health focused. APL was starting up health, but it was all kind of along like the data science lines, and I'm not super into that. Um, and so I always started to look at like medical companies, medical devices, that kind of thing. Just other ways to make devices that could improve quality of care, quality of life, any of those sorts of
Cool.
things. And so that's when I started in, I guess maybe 2019 is when I started taking my current master's program. I was taking classes in because I was interested in going into more of like medical hardware development. I figured I should know something about the human body because the previous biology course I think I had taken was like ninth grade, and so I just
Nice.
simply didn't know anything. So I took yeah I was enrolled in a applied biomedical engineering master's at the Hopkins Engineering for Professionals program because APL is part of Hopkins. They had like a really
Yep.
generous thing, so it was like a really easy way to like get those courses. And then once I was like decently far into that, I threw it on my LinkedIn that I was doing things targeting eventual medical field stuff. I got contacted by a company who I guess they were, head hunting kind of thing. I did an interview with
Mm-hmm.
them. I got that offer, but I didn't take the job. But that is when I started thinking like, oh, I guess like maybe I've kind of accomplished the goal of like maybe having knowledge that would be useful for medical devices. Um, so yeah, that was so in May of 2021, I think is when I uh, uh, I got two offers at the same time, and I ended up working at both of them because I took the first one, and it was for a company that was like it was called the uh, uh oh God, Maryland Development Center, and that was with a professor of mine from undergrad, Blankenship. I mentioned him earlier. He
Wow.
has a like medical device incubator here in Baltimore, and
That's cool.
yeah, it was very cool. So I worked there, but they do a lot of things where it was bare bones, and they did things that were on the what's the program called? It's some
SBIR.
exploratory research type things where you can like you're given a small amount of money to try something, and maybe you get the next round of funding, and if you don't, but I had some issues with the model. I didn't necessarily think I don't know, the funding seemed to be used in a strange way, but also similar to how it was used in my grad lab, where like you're kind of funding the next grant and using work you've already done. That's a thing that it seemed common. It didn't
Yeah.
feel ethically right to me. And so I ended up leaving that company after 9 months. And now, I asked the people who I had interviewed with previously, and they'd made me an offer. I said, 9 months ago, you were interested. How about now? And so now I work at a Key Tech in Baltimore, which is like it's a contract engineering company that works primarily with like research groups. So we work with like biologists, chemists, people who like make assays. We do a lot of like in vitro diagnostic devices where the researchers they have some process that they can do. They are doing manual pipetting and sample analysis, all these steps, and then they need to make the device. So I'm not doing like the biochem research aspects of it, but we are still doing like the very early stage R&D of building these new designs. And so I've been there for seven months now, I think, and it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. So here's a question: where do these researchers get funding? This is an off-topic question, but I'm curious. Get Where do they get funding to like pay you to do that?
So they are, I mean, I get their researchers, but they have and they're like actual companies. They're not just like
They're not
part of
like
a
professors.
university.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
right. Well, I
got it.
mean, some I think sometimes I also obviously can't. I'm not supposed to say like who our clients
Yeah,
are
yeah.
or
No,
whatever.
no, don't. I have the same thing,
But like
so I get
some
it. Yeah.
people have been, I think there are sometimes professors or like sometimes there are smaller things. Sometimes there are like large companies that just want us to do like look at their designs for outside consulting or whatever.
Okay.
But there are also ones that they have like a very promising procedure, and maybe it's funded by the government, maybe some of it's funded by private equity. But they have
Okay.
like the procedure, they just don't have a thing that can do it. And so they
Gotcha.
are some stage of a business model, very early stage. Like they don't have a product yet, but they have this is how the product will perform and that kind of stuff. So some of these people have like considerable
Yeah.
engineering
They,
budgets. They just don't have engineers.
I see. Okay, I get it. Yeah, yeah. And then my second question is, takes it back a little bit, but I wanted to ask. You mentioned that the modular prosthetics are really expensive to build, right? Is
I
that what you
mean,
said?
well, just to like to design because they could,
To study.
yeah, because they're. I mean, part of it's like they're so custom to a person because people get
Okay.
amputations in different ways, or like how do you get the signal? So some of it's like studying how to interface with the brain better or how to read signals off muscles. So it's still like partially researchy. And then there's also power density. You can't have a heavy system, and motors are heavy, and you have all these actuators for like your fingers. Where do you put
Yeah.
that? So
So
it's just like they're complex
I was gonna ask.
devices, but
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you think the cost comes from the fact that they're so individualized, which they are, but then also material cost. You have very high tech materials going into it to make them perform the way they do, and that can cause the cost to rise as well.
yeah, I think for the MPL in particular, it was more the like it was because it was more modular, it was less specific to the person. So
Okay.
that was helpful there. Uh, but it was it required so much research on like how to make it useful to the person through new advanced like machine learning methods for picking up whatever signals you can from because that was the uh, uh, more custom part, I guess, is that an
Mhm.
amputee might not have the same nerves kind of broken out to the surface depending on where they got the amputation. And so like
Right.
using different signals in different ways, I think that's probably where like the custom and then like the research costs came in. But then yeah, I think it was just like an expensive and kind of somewhat finicky device because it was using such like small motors and such. Uh, uh, the hand is always going to be needed. You can't really
Yeah.
put an arm on, and if you like the hand is also going to be there, right? So all of the smarts were in the hand, so that was super tiny, and but also you had all these motors which were small, meaning they're weak, and so there were lots of things of like how do we control all these actuators, how do you get them to be strong enough to actually be useful without being super
Right.
heavy, and then also have long enough power. So there were some things that just needed probably engineering advances to become more useful. uh but yeah, I think
Cool.
it was just expensive all around.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So hopping back to your current role, so do you work with any PhDs currently?
Let's see. I don't know if Keytech has any PhDs. Certainly at both my previous jobs, I did at APL. I did very
Mm-hmm.
frequently. At the research startup place, I also did all the time. But I mean, yeah, APL was I worked with like nuclear physicists who were
Yeah.
I don't know.
But you didn't feel out of place because you didn't have one.
No,
Like
no,
you didn't
definitely not at
feel
all.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't know the things I was doing,
Right.
right? You're so specialized that
Yep.
I learned a ton from them, but I also was explaining to them things a lot about, I was explaining lots of things about electrical engineering to them and how to, once I understood like what a scintillator crystal was, then, I needed them for that. And then I was able to talk about how
Sure.
to then, make the amplifiers to actually create measurable signals out of these devices.
Yeah. That's really cool. I feel like, it sounds like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you have no regrets about, the path that you took.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think I learned a lot. I had a definitely pros and cons of my grad school experience. I that is where I figured out the stuff that I really like doing now. So the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I had to do hardware work there, just by nature of robotics being so custom and all that is like that is the only that's a big part of the reason why I'm in the career I'm in today, just because that allowed me to figure out what I really liked. And all the different jobs I've had since then have all been very interesting, and I think I learned and took things from each of them, not just in terms of like the skills of engineering, but of like the concept, like I said, like the funding your next or funding your next
Yeah.
project thing, and your grants is not just an academia thing. It seems it also might be in the research world of private companies, which for better or for worse, that seems to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, and I think too, they always say that, taking a job or having an experience that tells you what you don't want to do long term is just as important of as finding something you do want to do because, you know, you now know what are sort of like red flags for you and what's your passion and it's sort of leading you into this narrowing path of something that you enjoy,
Yeah.
which that's great.
And just to think that
So
like
you're
potentially I could have still been in my grad program trying to like start my career until like
right
last
now.
year,
Yeah.
given 8 years. Yeah, I mean, some people probably think that I was like, oh, you couldn't hack it, and so you quit. Or, no, I didn't. If you think that you clearly don't know what happened, you're just wrong. And so I just don't really. Anyone who says that, it's like, okay, it's just an invalid opinion, and so I just kind of brush it off.
Yeah, that's good. I think people do get that kind of judgment a lot. And I think, you know, 5+ years is a long commitment for anything. And if at some point you discover about yourself that it's not A, gonna take you where you want to be, or B, bring you joy, that's a perfectly good reason to stop. So,
Yep. I mean, sometimes
um,
it is harder to quit a thing than to continue
yeah,
on. They each have
yeah,
their
very true.
difficulties. I think that, yeah, I definitely do not regret, in retrospect, while it was definitely a struggle at different points, like I would say that for sure now, I don't regret any of the steps along the way.
And you're taking classes now to finish up that third master's? Is that
Yeah,
still
yeah.
happening?
I technically don't need it at this point, which is what I try to convince my dad, but as he is insisting that if you start a thing, you have to finish it. I don't agree, but I'm almost done. I'll be done in like three
You're almost
weeks.
done.
I had already done 8 out of 10
Cool.
courses, so it was just kind of like, I might as well finish
That's
it.
great. Well, happy graduation
Thanks.
early. Um, okay, so I want to switch gears for 1 second and I want to ask you what you do for fun. What are some things you do outside of your work now that you're a working adult with free
Hmm.
time, question mark?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the only reason I don't have free time is that I am relatively busy with social things, I guess. I do all the standard, pretty nerdy, hardcore nerdy things. Like I play like Dungeons and Dragons. I play a lot of board games and video. Like I do the kind of classic nerd things in that way, I think. Sometimes I'd be
Mm-hmm.
in like I was like, you know what? I do all these things and I think to myself like, shouldn't I also enjoy comics? Like that those seem like up the alley of a person who also enjoys the thing. So I've just like and they're probably on my shelf back there. I just like bought random
Yeah.
comic books, and be like, all right, let's see if I like this because
And
theoretically I would based on just the likelihood there. Um,
what's
but
the verdict on that? Did you like them?
yeah, I've enjoyed some. They're not like a huge thing for me, but I was like, oh yeah, I've read Watchmen recently. That was really good.
Ah.
I'd seen the movie previously, but um so and I'm in a volunteer group here in Baltimore. It's called Volunteering Untapped. We do like events once a month. I'm on one of their like logistics committees, so I kind of help facilitate uh, making sure day of events go smoothly. Like this weekend, for instance, this Saturday, I'm running the event, and we're going to
Hmm.
be planting trees in partnership with the Baltimore Tree Trust down in Leon Day Park. So like I do that kind of stuff. Try to do some nice community things, or either just like involvement in the community or just exploring kind of the weird things that Baltimore has to offer. The Baltimore Rock Opera going there this Friday. It's an extremely
Oh,
weird thing, completely unnecessary to exist, but I'm so glad it does. It's a very, very fun place.
yeah. It exists for people like you then. There you go.
Yeah,
Well, listen, anyone who's listening in Baltimore, go plant some trees on Saturday, right? There's your plug.
absolutely.
Um, well, that's great. I mean, in my interview from last week, we were talking about how it's important to have a balanced kind of life with like a lot of different variety and also just to like, because success in one area of your life just promotes success in other parts, you know? And so, um, that's really great.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to ask you two concluding questions. One, we sort of touched on this, so you know, if you already answered it, that's fine. But what is something that was challenging for you in your program? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think part of it is that like I said previously was that I don't necessarily consider myself like the most creative person, and I also have sometimes a hard time of thinking like this thing seems like will this thing ever be useful? Like could this
Mm,
concept, if I have to like do a lot of research on this topic, could this ever be useful? And if I don't think it could ever be useful, then I certainly shouldn't do it, but I'm also maybe more like on the side if it could never be useful. I guess that's pessimistic. I don't know. And so figuring out what I wanted to like make my main topic was definitely I probably like hadn't done it at the point where I was there. But that I mean that also wasn't super out of the norm for the trajectory of my lab. Like
yeah.
it's process. I think for the first couple of years we just did like kind of one-off things, and then eventually we were like, okay, well, I did a lot of this thing, so I'll study that. And so I think kind of I certainly didn't go in with a this is what I want my research to be. And I was like trying to figure it out along the way, and I'm not sure I ever fully got there. So that was probably yeah, that was
Because you sort of put this high barrier on what would qualify as something worth pursuing.
yeah. A lot of the times I think robots are just like fancy RC cars. Like I like
Yeah.
robots, but without
They're like drones for the
intelligence,
backyard.
they're just like you drive them around with a remote control because they require so much in order to like do a behavior that's useful to
Yeah.
anyone. You need like all these cameras and all the like AI is not real, but all the machine learning stuff. You need
Yeah.
so many components that I'm like, okay, this one component by itself, I just don't know that it's gonna actually ever be useful, and I don't
So you
know that
should
it.
definitely spend 8 years
Yeah,
studying
right.
it,
So like,
right?
I don't know. So that was
Yeah.
challenging for me for sure.
Yeah. Cool. And this may be related, but if you had to give year one Garrett some advice, what would you tell him?
Uh, let's see. Like I said, I don't regret what happened. So I think,
Good.
I think it would be like, I don't know, there were people that I really respected in lab and then they were leaving because they just had finished, right? So like that's
Mm,
good. That makes sense. That's how that works.
yeah.
And so maybe in my starting years there, I would have tried to like do more stuff with them in terms of like I mean I did like social things with them, but I'm talking
Yeah. Or
about
like
like
absorb their knowledge
yeah, because I think that
and
they
yeah.
like so Aaron Johnson is one of the guys I'm talking about in particular. He now is a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I think he definitely kind of mentored me along the way there, but I probably could have focused more on that as opposed to just being I powered through my classes. I could have done them more slowly and like
Hmm.
done more of the research early, and maybe that would have been helpful because then I could have I don't know, done more with someone that I think I learned a lot from. But yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, I think back to, and there were people who were much older than me and like ready to graduate right as I started, and I was so overwhelmed by everything that I didn't give them, that opportunity, or give myself the
Hmm.
opportunity to kind of learn from them. But that's a good one. That's definitely a good one. All right, well that's all my questions. Is there anything you want to plug? Anything else besides trees? Um, any exciting things coming up?
If you
That
have money and an assay system, but you don't know how to make a device for it, come talk to Key Tech. We can probably do it.
Key Tech.
They would
There
love
we
that I'm saying
go.
it. I'm sure. I'm sure they would love that.
I'm sure. People are gonna listen to this and then go Google Key Tech. So there you go.
It's a
Your
good engineering
SEO is gonna
company.
go up.
We do a good job, I
Yeah.
think.
Are a lot of your customers local?
Uh, no, they're kind of all over. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, Boston's a big area because Boston is like huge in
In
well, all
med
that kind of
tech.
medical
Yeah.
med tech research. So work with a lot of people in Boston. There are, I mean, but also we're around a lot of like research hospitals,
Yep.
Hopkins and University of Maryland. So we definitely have some local people, but I think
Yeah.
it's a good spread across America, and we even have some like international people.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Garrett, it was really fun to talk to you, and hear your whole life story, and it's really exciting. And I hope it helps some of the listeners, who are maybe struggling with that decision to leave, because it's okay, and sometimes you'll end up in a better place.
Yeah, don't be. I mean, I'm not encouraging someone to quit if they don't want to quit, but if you want to quit, like, don't be afraid
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks to Garrett for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.